Hi everyone and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to try and answer the question, did this album, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, released in 1987, did this album start the grunge movement and did it kill hair metal? It's an interesting question and I'm going to try and answer it as best I can. So I suppose we'll start off and give a bit of background on what is hair metal and what is grunge. Hair metal is a subgenre of heavy metal that features pop-influenced hooks and guitar riffs, upbeat rock anthems, and slow power ballads. It borrows heavily from fashion and image of the 1970s glam rock scene. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick overview of grunge. So grunge, sometimes referred to as the Seattle sound, is an alternative rock genre and subculture which emerged during the mid-1980s in the US state of Washington, particularly in Seattle and surrounding towns. Grunge fuses elements of punk rock and heavy metal, and the genre features distorted electric guitars used in both genres, although some bands perform with more emphasis on one or like the other. And these genres typically use electric guitar, bass, drums and vocals and incorporate influences from indie rock bands such as the Sonic Youth. Lyrics are typically angst-filled and introspective, often addressing themes such as social alienation, self-doubt, abuse, neglect, betrayal, social and emotional isolation, addiction, psychological trauma and a desire for freedom. Okay, so grunge and hair metal, they're definitely two different styles of music. I actually happen to like both styles of music, but I suppose we'll just run through some of the comparisons. So Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, as I said, it was released in 1987. Some of the albums that were out at that time, so there was Van Halen, who had just got a new singer, Sammy Hagar. They had released this album 5150, that was released in 1986. And then in 1987 you had Aerosmith, Permanent Vacation. You also had Def Leppard, Hysteria. And you had Whitesnake's self-titled 1987 album. So all of these albums were considered big hair metal albums. And Guns N' Roses, when they came out, they were certainly put into the category of hair metal. If you've ever seen the video for the first track, the first video was Welcome to the Jungle. And Axl Rose's hair it's got loads of hairspray in it and it's all teased up. So certainly the hair metal style from a visual point of view, Guns N' Roses were trying to imitate that, no doubt about it, or certainly the label was trying to push them in that direction. So I'm just going to compare some of the bands I've talked about there with Guns N' Roses. So in terms of guitar playing, certainly there is some similarities between some of the bands I've mentioned there and Guns N' Roses, particularly Aerosmith, but probably more so Aerosmith's earlier stuff. Whitesnake were definitely going for, they were earlier as a blues band, but now they had moved into the heavy metal territory, and Whitesnake were definitely chasing the glam metal or the hair metal style. Def Leppard don't really sound too much like Guns N' Roses from a guitar point of view, and Van Halen definitely don't sound like Guns N' Roses from a guitar point of view. So the overall sound, Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, it certainly sounded a lot more raw than the hair metal bands that was out there. It also sounded grittier and grimier. It was, distorted guitars. The ballads on this song, really only Sweet Child of Mine is the only ballad, and it's all guitars. There's no keyboards, no pianos in it. So definitely a different sound. The vocal sound, so looking at singers like David Coverdale, Sammy Hagar, and Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, and also Joe Elliott from Def Leppard, they all sing at a very high range. And that was very common throughout the hair metal scene of the 1980s. So Axl Rose definitely has the range. He's singing up there. And then in terms of lyrical content, so a lot of the hair metal bands, it was all about the sex, drugs, the rock and roll, basically. The lifestyle they were living and having a good time. It's bands like Poison and Motley Crue that were out in that whole Sunset Strip scene of the late 1980s in Los Angeles. They certainly were living that lifestyle, and that's what Guns N' Roses wrote about in a lot of their songs. The whole sex, drugs, rock and roll lifestyle, disrespecting women, all that side of things. So certainly a lot of similarities between hair metal and what Guns N' Roses came out with in 1987. But I think Guns N' Roses, the Appetite for Destruction album, it does differentiate itself from a lot of the hair metal that was around at the time. Definitely sounds different in terms of the guitars, in terms of the gritty, raw sound, a lot of elements of punk in there as well. So in terms of grunge, I'm just going to run through some of the comparisons with grunge. So first, I'm going to. There's a few little connections between Guns N' Roses and bands in the Seattle scene, and there's no doubt that Guns N' Roses were an influence on some bands in the Seattle scene. So I'm just going to do my best to explain the similarities between the bands, or maybe some projects that the bands may have worked on together, or members of the bands, and then I'm going to explain a comparison then, as I've done with hair metal, in relation to the sounds and the basics of the bands. So if we look at a band like Alice in Chains, is their album Dirt. So originally Alice in Chains, they didn't have an I in the middle. It was Alice in Chains, similar to Guns N' Roses. So they were obviously heavily influenced by what Guns N' Roses were doing, and they wanted to imitate the name in that way. If you look at a band like Soundgarden, so this one, Bad Motor Finger, when this album was released, when Soundgarden went on tour, they actually supported Guns N' Roses. Guns N' Roses at that time were on tour for Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, but Soundgarden were supporting them. So there was a link there between Soundgarden and Guns N' Roses. Also, Pearl Jam, if you listen to the album 10, it's so similar in terms of guitar sound to Appetite for Destruction. The similarities here, you've got two guitar players, you've got a lead and a rhythm player. So for Guns N' Roses, lead player was Slash, rhythm player was Izzy Stradlin. For Pearl Jam, the lead player was Mike McCready and the rhythm player was Stone Gossard. If you listen to these albums in headphones, or if you have good speakers and you can pan left and right, you can clearly hear there's two guitar players playing two distinctively different parts, but the lines interweave between each other throughout the song. And I think this is fantastic, and I think it's very similar, and it's what makes these albums two of my favourite albums. And then in terms of the actual guitar solos, so Mike McCready was heavily influenced by Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, stuff like that. Very bluesy rock sort of sound, and you can hear that the whole way throughout Pearl Jam 10. Now Slash was influenced by Joe Perry, Jimmy Page, people like that, and you can hear his sound, but it's also a blues rock sound, but it's maybe a little bit different, maybe a little bit creamier and richer. Slash's sound is. Some of the scales he uses is different as well, where Mike McCready is certainly on 10, you can hear a lot of his Fender Stratocaster sound, where Slash used the Les Paul exclusively for Appetite for Destruction. But I have to say, like, two fantastic guitar albums, and Pearl Jam, I'm sure they were influenced by the sound from Appetite for Destruction. When they went to record 10 in 1991, Appetite for Destruction had been out 4 years at that point, and I'm sure they would have taken some inspiration from having two guitar players, one panned hard right, one panned hard left, and then this like bluesy lead guitar throughout the songs and guitar solos. I'm sure that definitely came into their mind. So Guns N' Roses seem to have been an influence on Pearl Jam there. And then I couldn't really, so there's four Seattle bands that really are the flag bearers for grunge music. There's Pearl Jam, there's Soundgarden, there's Alice in Chains. The fourth Seattle band is obviously probably the most important. It's Nirvana, and it's Nirvana Nevermind. So there's not a lot of cross-pollination between what Nirvana did and what Guns N' Roses were doing. I know Axl was a huge fan of Nirvana, but Nirvana were not big fans of Guns N' Roses. However, Slash did release this self-titled album in 2010, and it was his first solo album. And Dave Grohl from Nirvana, the drummer from Nirvana, actually plays on one track with Duff McKagan and Slash. And those of you who probably know Duff McKagan, who played bass for Guns N' Roses, is originally from Seattle. So there was always a link there between Guns N' Roses and Seattle. I think one of their first gigs, they actually travelled from Los Angeles the whole way up to Seattle to play the gig. One of their first gigs as a band. So there's a lot of links between Guns N' Roses, and Guns N' Roses' influence on the grunge scene. I think it's there for most people to see. But did they really start? Did they kick off grunge? So I'm just going to look at some other comparisons. So guitars, we've spoken about Guns N' Roses guitars. Certainly, from Pearl Jam's point of view, I think Guns N' Roses influenced the sound of Pearl Jam's guitars, or they're certainly very similar. So if you look at the sound, overall sound of Guns N' Roses in comparison to the grunge bands, well, this is an interesting point, because the grunge bands, in my opinion, the four flag bearers, as I've said, of grunge, so Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, they all sound completely different, those four bands. They all have unique characteristics that make them their own band. They're not trying to sound like each other, or not trying to sound like someone else. They're just basically sounding like themselves. And yeah, okay, it's all heavy music. It's guitar-based music. It's got heavy drums, and it's also, the lyrics are very interesting, and great singing, great vocals, great harmonies. And the bands kind of looked a certain way as well. But I have to say, like, Guns N' Roses, if Guns N' Roses were from Seattle with that sound, it's probably not a million miles away from what the grunge sound was. It was gritty and raw, and that's what Appetite for Destruction sounds like. In terms of the vocal sound, I don't think Axl Rose's voice you could call a grunge voice. When you think about Kurt Cobain and the way he's shouting, and the powerful voice he has. Also Eddie Vedder, such a powerful voice, and he can certainly scream as well. Then you've got Lane Staley from Alice in Chains, another fantastic vocalist, really knows how to hit the high notes, but with all that energy and angst in his voice. And then you have Chris Cornell, who's arguably one of the best singers of all time, certainly one of the best rock singers of all time. And Chris Cornell was able to really let loose as well. So I don't think Axl Rose's voice fits in with those four vocalists in terms of a grunge sound. And then if you look at the lyrical contents as well, so I think in the grunge scene, they were certainly very aware of the glam metal scene or the hair metal scene in Los Angeles, and they wanted to rebel against that. So they wanted to like treat people with respect. So whether it was people who were gay or it was women, people had rights in their opinion, and they were very conscious of social issues as well. Particularly Pearl Jam and Nirvana, were very, I suppose, they were spokesmen for that generation, in terms of things like women's rights and abortion, and the freedom to be yourself, to be gay or to be, follow whatever religion you want, or don't follow religion if you don't want. These choices you can make as an individual, as opposed to the glam metal was more, we're great, we're making money, we can do what we want, we can treat people however we want. Certainly bands like Motley Crue, that was their ethos. And if you look at the lyrics of their songs, Motley Crue are all about that side of things, the sex, drugs, rock and roll, as I said. But Nirvana, Pearl Jam, they wanted to distance themselves from that side of rock and roll where it was getting excessive. They had a different thing to say, and they had social issues that they wanted to bring to the fore, and they certainly did that. So yeah, I don't think Guns N' Roses lyrically sit in with the grunge scene either. So although the sound of the band might have fitted in the grunge scene if they were all from Seattle maybe, or the band started in Seattle, I don't think lyrical content and the vocal style of Axl Rose would fit into the grunge scene. So I think, in summary, Appetite for Destruction, it's a fantastic album, and it does have a foot in both camps in terms of grunge and hair metal. But I really don't think it started grunge. I think Nevermind is the album that really defined grunge, because it put grunge on the map. It exploded when it came out, and so many people went to buy it to check out who this band were. And then, of course, Pearl Jam became popular a little bit after that, then with their album 10 going crazy in the charts, and then Soundgarden and Alice in Chains sort of followed on from that. So I think Nevermind, that's the album that's what really started grunge. And I think you could argue as well, Nevermind, it put a dent in hair metal. I don't think hair metal was ever really killed. It was unfashionable to like hair metal in the 90s, certainly certainly in America. I don't know if hair metal was ever that big in the UK and Ireland in the 1980s, but in the States, Nevermind certainly put a dent in hair metal. But what I see now is a lot of these hair metal bands, they're actually still around, or they're doing their tours, they're doing farewell tours, and they're still very popular. So the likes of, I'm just going to run through here some of the bands I spoke about. Well, like Motley Crue, they completed a tour last year, and I actually caught them in Dublin, and they were okay, they were fine. There was nothing special, plenty of backing tracks and dancers and visuals and lights, but yeah, they weren't one of the best bands I've ever seen. Whitesnake, I saw them 2 years ago in Dublin, and they were coming to the end at that point. But Whitesnake are a fantastic band, and I've seen them, I think, 3-4 times in the last 15 years, 20 years. So yeah, great band, Whitesnake. Def Leppard I've seen a number of times, and they're also a great band. So I don't think Nevermind killed any of those bands. Aerosmith, another band who've just announced that they're actually retiring from live touring. I've seen them a number of times, and I don't think that Nirvana ended their career, certainly. And then also Van Halen, who are currently, Sammy Hagar is currently doing a tour with Michael Anthony and Joe Satriani, and they're basically playing songs from Sammy Hagar's back catalogue, including a large portion of Van Halen songs from the Sammy Hagar era. And I think that's fantastic, and that tour is going really well, and I hope it comes to Europe, comes to Ireland, so that I can go and see it. But I don't think I don't think the grunge scene killed Van Halen in any way. So it might have been unfashionable to like hair metal music in the mid-90s in the United States, but I think there's been a resurgence in hair metal, as there has been a resurgence in grunge and all this great rock music that was released in the 1980s and 1990s. As I said at the start of the video, I like both. I have a foot in both camps myself. I like grunge music, I like heavy metal music and hair metal music. It's all good. Once there's good guitars in there, good production, good songwriting, I'm on board. So look, I didn't really answer the question, I suppose, but if you have strong opinions on this, please let me know in the comments section. I'd be very interested to hear what people think here. Appetite for Destruction, I think it probably was a turning point, but I don't know whether it was the catalyst for grunge in Seattle, and also I don't think it completely killed off hair metal. So sorry, maybe the title was a bit clickbaity, but I don't think I could really answer this question. It's still a fantastic album, and all of the albums I showed here today are fantastic. So if you get a chance to listen to them and give me your opinion, I'd be very interested in that. Okay, we've come to the end of the video, so if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please click the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. And if you could also hit the notification bell, you'll be notified of when new videos come out, and leave a comment below. Let me know what albums you like from the grunge era or the hair metal era, and if you think Appetite for Destruction was certainly like a turning point that killed hair metal or that started the grunge scene, please let me know in the comments below. I'd be very interested to hear some feedback on this. Okay, I'll talk to you in the next video. Bye now.